Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome to another episode of Spotlight. Prime Minister Tony Abbott made a national security address earlier this week, flaring up quite a bit of controversy within the Muslim community and even within the wider Australian community. Julian Burnside, accusee, said that the Islamophobia stirred up by Abbott and Andrew Bolt is a bigger threat to us than terrorism. Haroon has the latest.
The Muslim community has voiced their outrage and disappointment in recent days over Prime Minister Tony Abbott's national security address on Monday, saying that it undermined and belittled the efforts of leaders and grassroots organisations and inflamed sentiments of racism and Islamophobia. Mr Abbott claimed that Muslim leaders could be doing more to combat the spread of extremist ideology, saying,
"Now, I've often heard Western leaders describe Islam as a religion of peace. I wish more Muslim leaders would say that more often and mean it."
The Lebanese Muslim Association released a press statement on Tuesday strongly condemning the Prime Minister's comments as reckless and antagonistic. They claim that Mr Abbott has implied that Muslims must continue to condemn what is clearly unaffiliated with the religion, despite continued efforts to distance Islam from violent acts committed in its name. The Muslim community fears a rise in Islamophobic attacks in response to Mr Abbott's comments, with reports indicating that such incidents are on the rise. The Islamophobia Register, a local organisation providing a means for incidents of harassment and anti-Muslim sentiments to be recorded, has reported a number of incidents both on social media and in public, particularly since the Sydney siege incident late last year.
To discuss the impact on the Australian Muslim community, I have with me in the studio Sheikh Wesam Charkawy, a Sydney-based Imam who was born and raised in Sydney. Sheikh Wesam, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh, Prime Minister Tony Abbott in his national security statement said, and I quote, "I've often heard Western leaders describe Islam as a religion of peace. I wish more Muslim leaders would say that more often and mean it," end quote. As an Imam within the Muslim community who has worked extensively amongst the grassroots, how would you respond to this statement?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Let me start by saying first and foremost that Muslim leaders have incessantly and actively encouraged peace, not simply as a responsive measure, but because it is part of the ethos and core beliefs of Islam. They have articulated openly and driven these messages of goodwill, social cohesion and harmony and exhausted every facet available to them. And when we hear words like this, it is very unfair. We find it very unfair and unreasonable to be told that, look, what you're doing is not enough. And even when you are heard, that you don't mean what you say. These words indicate that there's almost a duplicitous nature or deceitful nature about a community, which is an unreasonable position to be put in. And let me just add to that, the media from time to time often overlook those messages of goodwill that are put out by Islamic leaders. But to suggest or have this presupposition that the absence of something in the mainstream media is the absence of the thing altogether is simply wrong. And so I think the words, many Muslims in fact, were offended by the Prime Minister's words, deeply offended, because it's almost like a them and us mentality. And the Muslim leaders have extended their hand to the community, to government, for engagement, but it almost feels like they've been shunned, and it almost feels like that their actions have just been pushed to a corner and they've not been taken notice of.
Now, as someone who's on the ground working extensively with the youth, how does the Prime Minister's speech help in your effort dealing with such problems? Is it helpful or is it unhelpful?
Look, the sentiments are unhelpful and they have the potential to be very divisive. Mm-hmm. This is because the very people that may have a particular persuasion that you're trying to sway, these sentiments may be used as leverage. Secondly, it might undermine the leader's position, because if the imam or the leader is telling the people, we need to engage, we need to be out there, people will use that against the imam, will undermine his position, saying, but these people are actually saying that you are deceitful, that we don't trust what you say, how can we actively engage? And so sometimes it is counterintuitive to what you're actually doing on the ground. I've heard sentiments of, we're fearful, we don't know what's coming.
From the youth? Or?
From the youth. I've heard sentiments that we are fearful, we're scared, we don't know what ensues after this. I think the best approaches in this regard is to listen. We are all stakeholders in this. We have vested interest in the safety and security of this country. So we have those vested interests. Given that we are stakeholders, I think it's important to listen. I think sometimes what we need to be careful of is to talk to people or about people rather than talk and engage people in the discussion. I think that's a very important approach to consider, particularly when it comes to social cohesion or tolerance.
Now, there is criticism that the Muslim leaders or imams are not taking proactive steps, are not doing enough dealing with some of these issues. Do you feel this is valid, and what's some of the work that you've been doing?
Now, this is an untruth, and just to name a few. Recently, I was engaged in an event, in a major event called #BeTheBridge. Now, that event, #BeTheBridge, entailed Jill Ma, who was a survivor of the London bombings.
Yes.
Now, she came to Sydney and we engaged in an event, and there were faith leaders across all spectrums. There was a Jewish faith leader, there was a Christian, there was organizations who work in these facets, who all came on board, and mainstream media was invited. That's one. There was also, a few months ago, an open mosque day, where this was national across the whole of Australia, where non-Muslims were invited to come to the mosques and ask any questions, clear up any rumours or innuendo. I can tell you also that we have weekly interfaith dialogues. We have seminars from universities. We have Muslim-run sporting facilities, particularly where the area is dominated by Muslims. We have weekly engagements, weekly barbecues. There is always things that are occurring, and I have not known any Muslim organizations that have ever shut their doors and said to any person within the community that these facilities aren't available to you. I've never heard that. Quite the contrary. The facilities that we have, whether it be our mosques, whether it be our institutions, whether it be marriage counselings, these have always been ready and available for the community should they need that assistance. For one example, the other day we had a marriage counselling sessions for non-Muslims, and they came in and they said, could you help us? And I was more than willing and more than happy to help them.
Okay, now there is a tendency to accuse Muslim leaders and organisations which criticise the government's approach towards the Muslim community as being sympathetic towards things like terrorism.
Yeah.
So you've spoken about the community liaison, how much effort goes within the community from the imam's point of view.
Yeah.
But the question here is, these sentiments, how do you feel about this, where you're told that what you're doing doesn't counteract terrorism?
Well, at the end of the day, Islam opposes extremism in all facets, by any persuasion, whoever it's from. And I think it's important to understand something, that if somebody points out an inequality, say in a particular policy or approach, pointing to the greater context or the disenfranchisement within the group, it doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with terror or terrorism. And I think sometimes that point is lost. If there is an injustice or an oppression, it needs to be identified, an injustice and oppression, regardless of who or what it ensues from. I think that's very important. And I think what the Muslim leaders will just refuse to be a part of is the dichotomy of you're either with us or against us. The world is more nuanced. There are other approaches.
Okay, but I mean, the question that I really want to sort of understand from yourself is that communities or organisations, Muslim organisations, are being told that you're not doing enough against terrorism. What do you have to say about that?
Well, at the end of the day, people who do work behind the scenes, many people, and if you're doing something sincerely, you're not working for glory or tabloid. And so, in reality, the great effort that are done by Islamic leaders, many of this work does go unnoticed, but the work that they do is of a great quantity. And so many things are being done. You've got youth programs, you've got youth mentoring programs, you've got sporting programs. This is very, very important, intricate part of the peace and security of this country. And comments like that really, I mean, whether they were meant or unmeant, they were unhelpful, and they have the potential to be very divisive and demonize an entire minority group.
Sure. Now, I did see you on television a day after the Sydney siege, the tragic events over there, showing solidarity. Unfortunately, we're seeing the Abbott government at the moment using this particular situation and calling it an Islamic act of terror. And somehow the Muslim community is being held responsible for these criminal actions of one perpetrator. What are your thoughts about this?
Look, can I just say that, other than solidarity, I know many, many Muslim leaders and many Muslims who went down there because they were genuinely upset. When you have loved ones that don't come back to their families, it is a genuine feeling of sadness. And we were partaking in the sadness that the whole community was feeling. And so we would go down there every day and many hours at a time. And many Muslim leaders were down there, including the Mufti himself. Now, this was an event that no person of faith can justify. Nobody can say that this ensued from my faith. Only a person of unsound mind would articulate such a fallacious statement. This individual's record speaks for itself, and the person in question was a person of unsound mind. And given the fact that he said that he was Muslim, Therefore, to say that this therefore belongs to the Muslim, or we're going to make Muslims wear this, I think is a very unreasonable position. And I think for anybody to use their position to say that this belongs to the Muslims on account of the fact that he was Muslim and it ensued from a crazed man, I think to put it in the terrorism basket, I think is a very unreasonable and untenable position.
And how does this affect the Muslim community?
Well, it does affect the Muslim community because none of the Muslim community affects or really supports this position. All the Muslims really have condemned and censured, and how much more can a community censure and condemn? This act was unacceptable by all Muslims. I have not come across a person of sound mind who's accepted this act ensuing as part and parcel of their faith. And they've outright condemned it, they've outright censured it. So to say that this belongs to you, that this is part and parcel of Islam, I think this is very, very unfair. And I think this is very unwanted. And I really don't believe that anybody could and should use their position, particularly when that position occupies a person of power, to articulate their sentiments.
Sheikh Wesam Charkawy, thank you for being with us. Thank you for watching. If there's a story you'd like us to run, send us an email to spotlight@onepathnetwork.com. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.